diary, everyone. So you will see this. I know quite a lot of you follow us on Instagram and on LinkedIn and stuff. So this is a guy called Sam Conniff, and he's doing something really interesting called the Uncertainty Experts. And it's a very experimental way of learning all about uncertainty. He's coming on the podcast in a couple of weeks. And on the 30th, he's going to do a Pod Plus takeover. So just in case you want to put that one in your diary as I must make sure I've got time for that one. Exactly the same time. So if you come every week anyway, it will just be Sam that week. If you are particularly interested in signing up to his next experiment that he's doing, which I think starts October, November time, it's essentially like being part of a documentary. He's sort of doing it a bit in combination with Netflix. We've got a link for you, which Sarah's going to put in the chat, so you can just read more after today. And we've known Sam for a long time, and he's given us a code, which is squiggly, so easy to remember. So he has got an early bird rate for it at the moment. And if you put in squiggly, you get another like 25% off. So he's only going to have a limited amount of spaces, and we will talk about that offer loads more on Instagram and those kind of things. But I thought I would just mention it today, just in case any of you wanted to take a look. And I also thought if you take advantage of the early bird plus the squiggly discount, it makes it even more affordable, particularly if you can persuade your company to pay for it. I think it works out at about £66 if you can get your company to pay for it. And I think it's a very, very different. I've done the first part of it, and it's absolutely fascinating. Kate's already signed up. Don't worry if you've not got great Wi-Fi. We're not doing a breakout today. We're just going to do lots of annotation and chat, so don't worry at all. But just that I would mention about the Uncertainty Experts, we'll talk about it again, but really I wanted you to get that date in your diary for the Pod Plus, where Sam's going to do a bit of a takeover. I think that'll be a really interesting one. Okay, cool. Just let the last few people come in. So today we're talking about collaboration at work. And I really like this one quote from Francesca Gino. She's an academic and a researcher. And she talks about when most organizations strive to increase collaboration, they approach it too narrowly. So they sort of say, oh, we just want to be, perhaps it's a value, we just want to be brilliant at collaboration. It's an important part of how we work, but they don't really see it as a skill to teach. And I always think in lots of ways, and we've said this before, whenever something is a skill, the reassuring thing is it means it's something that we can all learn and practice, rather than maybe this more abstract thing that we aspire to, but we never quite know whether we're getting any better at. So I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today is really building on this idea of what does it mean if it's a skill. And as I said, I'm going to build on the podcast episode today rather than repeat it, because I found a brilliant article by Linda Grattan, a great London Business School professor, and Tammy Erickson. And Tammy is actually a US professor, but also works at London Business School. And I've been taught by both of them. So they are brilliant. They do very in-depth research in the kind of practical environment. So they spend most of their time in organizations. And they've done some really interesting work on collaboration now, and particularly in the context of people working in this kind of hybrid world of work. So I was interested to know from you, if you're thinking about collaboration now in your organization versus 18 months ago, would you say it's worse? Would you say it's better? It's stayed the same? Or maybe it's just different? So I'll just put those. So let's use the annotations for everybody who's very used to doing this. Is it worse? Is it better? Has it stayed the same? Or is it different? So stars on the screen. If you're not used to using the annotations, view options, annotate, stamp, and then star. If you're on your phone, sorry, it doesn't work. But you can always let me know in chat, and I can, as Sarah said, I can add. Also, do you know what? I nearly didn't put different because I thought if Helen was here, she'd give me a hard time for always giving an extra option. So now I'm feeling smug that I did include different. It should be better, yeah. Different because of the nature of the work. Got a few people still joining. So worse, better, the same. You are right, Steve, it is a 2x2 matrix. Yeah, so maybe you should be okay with it. Fatigue, that's really interesting, Leon. Fatigue is playing a really big role in it. So, I mean, I've been quite binary and said now versus 18 months ago. Perhaps it's got better and it's getting worse again because people are kind of just finding it really hard. We're seeing that in the workshops that we do, that people are, just been on screen a lot, often during a day, and they need a bit of time to relax and recover. We're changing a little bit how we do some of our workshops as a result. Okay, so some people saying worse, some saying better, some saying the same. That's sort of relatively equally spread. And then lots of you saying different. Let's just add a bit of nuance to that different. Let me know what feels different in chat. Let's just kind of paint a bit of a picture of this difference. Like, what made you kind of gravitate towards difference? Is it the technology? The assumption that we would all make, is it just that we are all still behind screens? To Leon's point, is it the fatigue that's giving us a useful insight? Restructures, Anya, and pandemic changes. More communication, but hard to influence. That's a really good insight, Leon. Yeah, so people communicating a lot, but how do you influence people to kind of make decisions maybe? Does that slow things down? A bit more of an effort. Some people are settling into it, but some different problems, Steve, yeah. Smaller workforce, Anya, that's interesting. Need to collaborate more. We're going to talk a bit about size. Yeah, Lucy, yeah, there's not less barriers to entry. Everyone can just join. There's no room size. You can only get 6 people in this room, which maybe sometimes helps. Bit slower, Megan, interesting. Fatigue of back-to-back Zooms. Yeah, this whole back-to-back Zooms thing is a killer, I think. Less social capital, Helen, yeah. Bit more nudging. Oh, no, actually not a bit more. Kate's saying much more nudging required. Yeah, and we're all still shifting. Interestingly, Linda Grattan's work on hybrid working, she's publishing a new book on it in February next year. And her first book, The 100-Year Life, really influenced a bit of the work that we did in our very early days on Squiggly. So she's done a lot of research as hybrid working, collaboration, harder to measure in large groups. Yeah, okay, all very interesting. Let me just get rid of those stars. And interesting that we're saying different. So in this work, in this research that Tammy Erickson and Linda Grattan have done, and we will share this article at the end of the session, they talk about this really interesting insight that they saw. And I think they worked in about 55 different companies all across the world. They talk about these collaboration conundrums. So essentially what they see is that the most successful teams also have the same characteristics as the least successful teams. And there's these really interesting tensions in terms of what makes teams successful. So I thought I would describe 4 of these conundrums that they talk about. Ask you which of these feels most familiar to you, or do any of them, do you think, actually, no, that's not a challenge, or that's not a conundrum where I work? And then point out some of the characteristics and the kind of environmental factors that they feel are really important, and get into some skills and some ideas for action. So the first thing is, what's interesting is they found in lots of organizations, the number of people collaborating in one team, in one project, is increasing. In the main, what happens is the more people that you have, the less able we are to collaborate effectively. And the tipping point in their work, so this won't be universal, but in the work that they did, was 20. So up to about 20 people, we seem to be able to collaborate quite effectively. Obviously, there's lots more factors than just number of people, but they often found that lots of big bits of work, big bits of strategic work that were happening in the organizations that they looked into had teams that were much more than 20 people trying to work together. And often that created a real challenge in terms of the more people you have, I guess the more coordination, that intuitively makes sense to me. The more people we have, the harder it is to collaborate. You know, there's that Jeff Bezos from Amazon talks about, I don't want teams that are any bigger than people who could sit around a table and share a pizza. Now that's probably not 100% realistic all the time, but you get his logic in terms of what he's trying to say there. And you get teams within teams, right? So you might have a team of 100 people working on something really big, but that often does break down into mini teams. But size is an interesting factor. The next one is that increasingly teams are coming together with very diverse backgrounds, experiences, points of view to share, knowledge and insights. So when they talk about diversity here, they don't mean like gender and kind of individual characteristics. They mean diversity of knowledge, of insights, of experience. And again, and we actually do know this generally from diverse teams from the work that McKinsey have done, when more diverse teams come together with very kind of disparate backgrounds or knowledge, they are less likely to share what they know. So we all come together and maybe I work in one country, you work in another, maybe I'm a marketing expert, you're a sales expert. The more disparate we are, kind of almost like the less we have in common, the less likely we are to share. Maybe that's because of, we feel more comfortable with people a bit like us. That might be an uncomfortable truth and a reality. Maybe that's because we don't know how to share what we know. Maybe it's because we think, well, they won't understand, if we're being honest. I can imagine myself thinking that some of the time in some of the big teams I worked in, thinking, well, if I share this, they're going to end up being critical, or they won't understand because, they don't get me. They don't get the team that I'm coming from. So that's quite interesting. So the more diversity you have in a team, the less people are likely to share. They did look at distance, and there are different points of view on this, but they did find that in terms of distance, when people are spread out across the world, that does make collaboration harder. And most of the organizations they looked at did have people in various different places. So you had to be more intentional about how you thought about collaboration. And what's interesting is they also did find, and what we're going to talk about next, is organizations and teams that were collaborating very effectively and really successfully that had all of these characteristics, i.e. teams of more than 20, they were very diverse, they were very disparate in terms of their distance. So it can be done. And then the last one, and I think this probably links a bit to the diversity point, is when you have lots of experts, you get unhelpful, unproductive conflict. So the more expertise there's almost seen to be present in a team, the more unhelpful, unproductive conflict there is. And that's maybe individuals who assign themselves as experts. I'm an expert in this thing. And again, perhaps that's where we get into being, some of you might remember this, people who come every week, a phrase that we've talked about before on the podcast, unhelpful expertise. So we don't want to say being an expert is a bad thing. That's definitely not true. But there is a point, and I'm trying to remember who did the research, might have been Adam Grant, who did some really interesting research on this tipping point of when you become an unhelpful expert, i.e. you think, you probably get into fixed mindset. You think, well, I know the answers. I don't need to listen. I don't need to learn from other people. So if you've got a team of people where perhaps everybody holds that expertise lightly, or some generalists, it is usually easier to collaborate than if you've got lots and lots of experts who sort of see themselves as experts and perhaps have quite a fixed mindset as well. So you can see some of this, you can see how some of these things kind of create conundrums. What I found really interesting then is, what are the teams and the organizations that do really well and that all of these factors are present? So that is possible. And that's, this is probably almost like some of the hardest characteristics to have all at the same time, but you can still be very, very effective in your collaboration if some of these next things are happening. So let's talk about those three things. The first one, and I actually really remember being taught this by Tammy Erickson at London Business School, and it's always really stuck with me. She is very big into making the distinction between what versus how. And what she says, and their research reinforced this, is you've got to be crystal clear on this. There's got to be almost like no wriggle room. You've got to kind of go, I've got complete clarity on what we are trying to do. What are our objectives? What does success look like? What is this team here to achieve? That has got to be, we've all got to have the same understanding, and we've all got to know exactly what it is that we're trying to do. However, over here, this is where we need to give complete autonomy and freedom on the how. So we're really clear on our objectives. We know what we need to do. How we get there, then you've got to give the freedom to individuals and teams to figure that out. If that is directive, if we are told how to get something done, that's where teams fall down. Makes sense, because you lose your autonomy. you lose your ability to influence, to bring your expertise, to figure things out. So the what, to me, I often think is like setting the direction very clear at the start and a shared understanding. We can't all have different whats. We've got to have the same what. And then the how has got to have complete freedom, complete autonomy. And yes, if you do read this article, which I would recommend, it is really good. I learned a lot from reading it. Lots of their organizations they're talking to are very big global companies. But I think you can see this in the context of small teams, of teams of 2 or 3. This is just as important as whether you're global or not. So what versus how, characteristic 1. The next one, which is a leadership point, which I found really interesting, is there's a lot of debate about which are better leaders for teams that are trying to collaborate, task leaders or relationship leaders. You know, people who are more into the what versus more into the how. What they found is that you need what they describe as ambidextrous leaders who recognize that upfront, it's much more important to be task focused. So we are very clear about actions, objectives, we've got project plans, you know, we are making progress through the tasks that really matter. And then there is a point during projects or during collaborations where leaders move from being task focused to being relationship focused. So that's interesting because that's quite a hard skill, because most of us will be slightly more inclined one way or the other. But it's being ambidextrous enough to recognize and have it being adaptable enough, I guess, to recognize at this point in this project or in this task or in this objective, we need to be very clear on tasks, and I need to help teams. My job is to support and to help teams make progress in quite a action tangible way. And then I guess there is a point where you step back and give teams more space and you focus on, you know, how are people feeling? You know, are people feeling like they've got enough space? Have people got enough time to rest and recover? Are those relationships working well? Is there any tensions that you could help support? So I found that quite interesting, and thinking about this for yourself, because when we talk about leadership, we don't mean your position on an organizational chart. We all lead collaborative teams at some point, I'm sure, whatever that looks like. And I think just knowing where would you naturally be, like, for example, Helen and I are always quite interesting, because I would always naturally be over here. Helen would naturally be over here. So between us, we're ambidextrous, but actually we're different. So it means that for me, when I'm maybe trying to collaborate on something new, I just need to put a bit more emphasis over here. And Helen is really good. This is why she's so good at making stuff happen quickly, because she's good at the task thing. But, you know, there'll be a point where she also needs to recognize, okay, well, I can let people get on with these tasks now, and I can give them, my job here is to give people space and support. So I think that's really interesting on that balance, task versus relationships. And then the last one, which I thought was an interesting cultural point, is, what should we do? In organizations where collaboration works really well, there is almost a coaching culture of, that's not right, one second, of informal mentoring, not meetings, informal mentoring. And by informal mentoring, and they talk about this actually in a few ways, there is just an acceptance and an understanding that if somebody wants to learn from you, you would always give that person your time. So they give an example of, I think it was Nokia or somebody like that, where almost from the moment you join an organization, your manager will talk to you about, here are 10 people you should go and have conversations with. And all of those 10 people will give you time. And you learn from those people. So I guess what this gets to, when I was reading, I was thinking, this is essentially a culture where people are very used to sharing their knowledge and sharing what they know in a generous learning way, learning environment. So therefore, when you go into collaborating and you're perhaps with teams of people who you've not met before, because we're moving in and out of teams more frequently, that we're all very used to sharing what we know to help other people succeed. It's that sort of learners as teachers that we sometimes talk about, going, well, we're all here to learn and to collaborate, and there's not that sense of, I need to hold tightly or keep close that insight or knowledge that I've got. We are all trying to help each other, and it's not dictated by hierarchy. So I think that's quite interesting. There are definitely, if you do read the article, some bigger cultural things But again, I think you can think about how would you do this within your team? How would you create an environment where you are learning from each other? Curiosity coffees that we've talked about before, that would be a really good example of if you were in a team or in an organization where people were having curious career conversations, curiosity coffees, that would imply you would end up with a team with better collaboration when it kind of came to more of the day job. So there were definitely some bigger things outside of the day job that then help you with collaboration in the day job. Emma, yeah, great suggestion. 6 Thinking Hats, definitely worth reading. That idea of, being able to put on different hats at different moments, really interesting. So I just wanted to talk quickly before we finish about these 6 skills that I think can be really helpful when we're thinking about collaboration. And I'm going to ask you to let me know with a tick and a cross, which one you think you're best at, which is your even better if. So let me go through the 6 quickly, and then we'll do a bit of voting. Partly because I'm always interested to see if there's an obvious gap, how can we maybe help? And also, how can you help each other? So the first one is listening. So this is when we're starting to be specific about the skills that contribute to collaboration. Another one of the things that actually was both in the podcast this week and then in this article I read, that when organizations invest in these skills, that's when collaboration is at its most effective. Empathy. So just be thinking about this for yourself now. Feedback, which I guess goes to that, also to that informal mentoring a bit. Some of you, I think I spotted it in chat already. Knowing when to lead, knowing when to follow. That's what we've done next week's podcast on. And believe me, that was not an easy record. We had to work very hard on that podcast episode. Conciseness and clarity in terms of your communication. And the last one is looking for win-win in objectives, in conversations when we're collaborating with different people. So using the stamps, and maybe try and use the tick or the cross if you can, just to make it really easy for me. Just let me know on screen, which one is your best of these 6? If you're thinking of these 6 skills, which one is you at your best? And do 1 cross for your even better if. So we're doing a bit of a gap analysis here, skill gap analysis. Let's have a look and see if there's a theme across the group. Okay, those green ticks do not show up very well on that colour. 1 second, let me just see if I can do something magical. Okay, there we go. That's better. So lots of us empathetic. That doesn't surprise me with this group because you're all here also helping each other to learn. Have we got any trends or themes in terms of, okay, well, I'm really glad we've done the podcast on leading versus following for next week. So hopefully that'll be helpful. Leading versus following, it took Helen and I, it's very rare, it took us 2 different records to do that podcast because there was so much to think about and to figure out. We started, realised we weren't going to get the time to do it, stopped and then had to start again. Feedback coming up, that's coming up as a real theme. Let me know in chat just in case there's anything that we can help with. When I say feedback here, what's the specific skill that you find hard? Is it giving feedback? Asking for feedback? Is it that there's just not a feedback culture where you work, so you feel like it's really hard to do that? I think that is the article, Lucy. Let me just double check. Let me just double check. Yeah, it is 8 ways to build collaborative teams. Is that the, I'll just put it in as well, just in case. Okay, so feedback, no culture. Yes, it's a cultural thing. Interesting. Which podcast has the 3 R's in it? Regular, routine, and relevantly on. I suspect it would be a feedback podcast, quite an ego-driven environment. That's interesting. Great, Steve. So very specific there. Struggle to give feedback when reading Radical Candor. Great. Yeah, okay, Tracy. So there's a mix here on feedback between cultural challenges. So I am in an environment where it is hard to do this, and specific challenges for yourself as a skill. And I always think about what can you role model, because by just role modeling, that's the thing that you can control. That's the thing that you can practice. So even if it is small changes to how you give and receive feedback, and even if sometimes it doesn't work, I honestly want to remember asking feedback that had taken me ages to build up the courage to ask for, and the person just didn't even reply. And this person was someone I saw quite frequently, who was very senior, and just didn't even, honestly, just didn't even, and it had taken me so much like bravery to even ask, because I was like, it's the right thing to do to ask this person for feedback. Didn't even reply. And obviously I can still remember it. And do you know what I realized in that moment was I still felt good, because I felt like I was role modeling behaviors that I felt were important, and that also I wanted to encourage with the people that I worked with. And so I even like told that story. I wasn't specific about the person, but I said, you can only do what you can do. So just think about asking, giving feedback, make it really informal, make it really easy for people to give you feedback, frame your feedback. As soon as I started framing my feedback, I got much better quality feedback. So rather than just saying, oh, Lucy, I wonder if you could just give me some feedback about Pod Plus today. Actually, you might be able to do that. But if I said to Lucy, what do you think was the best thing about Pod Plus today? And what's one even better if for next week? Suddenly that just helps to frame that feedback in a way that makes it much easier to give. And also I get better quality feedback as a result. Not give feedback. Yeah, I think it's also really interesting. I was doing a session yesterday with loads of about 160 people in an organization who are at the start of their careers. And we asked them to do a bit of word association around feedback. And they were so positive about it. So positive. All those words were positive. They wanted feedback. They were really up for it. They all wanted to grow. And they were like, we know it's really important. I do that exact same exercise with loads of organizations across the world. People have had quite tough experiences around feedback, and it is very rare to get 100% positive words like I did yesterday. And so I think it's also knowing that sometimes the reason we don't give and get lots of feedback is perhaps it's not been delivered particularly well in the past. People can be quite nervous and quite scared of it. No organization I work with does this really, really well. But you can, I think if you can start small, you can as a team make some progress. That's almost always where I'd recommend. Yeah, very good, Leon. Being the change you want to see. What went well, even better if, yeah, Lucy's been using that. It is very contagious. Like we use it all the time, obviously, and loads of the organizations we work with have used it and adopted it. So I would encourage you, if you're thinking about your collaboration, you will all work in teams, because very rarely do we work by ourselves all of the time now. Think about what are the conditions for collaboration that you can control and that you could put in place to help some of those dynamics that we need for collaboration to work really well to be there. So whether that is you moving from task to relationship, whether it's thinking about that informal mentoring, knowing that it helps with collaboration, whether it's the what versus the how, and then think about your own skill set and what are you already doing really well that maybe you could help other people with, and what's your one even better if. So I hope that's been interesting today. I found that really interesting, learning more about it. I essentially think I could now do another podcast, collaboration part 2, because I've learned loads more since we recorded it. As I said, next week we are doing how to kind of flex between leading and following. A few people have actually listened to it who do our editing and have promised us it does make sense, because I think by the end of it we weren't sure, you know, when you've sort of gone around in circles and explored it in all sorts of directions. So I'll be really interested to see what you'll think of that one. As a quick reminder, if you sign up to Pod Mail that comes out every Tuesday, we now put all of our free resources for the podcast in one place. So the pod sheet, the pod note, the links to Pod Plus and previous recordings, and anything that we do connected to the podcast that's all free, we'll keep putting in that Tuesday Pod Mail. So really useful to sign up to that if you've not already. And if it's not, if that works for you in terms of having one more thing in your inbox. And Sarah's put the link in. Oh, Reg, I don't know why you didn't receive it. Sometimes you have to check junk or your spam, which I can't believe that our pod mail would ever go to spam, but I think sometimes it does. For those of you who are new today, I hope you found that a helpful session and a good start to your Thursday. As always, really appreciate you all coming along. I know you were sharing loads in chat today to also help each other, which is also great. Sorry, I couldn't keep up with the chat as much today. I was keen to make sure we also shared quite a lot of content today. Thank you so much, everybody.